Marcus Chun stood at the observation window and stared at the neutron star. It spun so fast that it looked like a disk of blue-white light against the darkness of space. The research station called Confluence orbited this star, and Marcus had traveled 3 months to get here. He pressed his hand against the cold glass and smiled. This was really happening. He was the first human engineer to work on an alien space station. "You are the human?" A voice clicked behind him. Marcus turned around. The creature standing in the doorway looked like a giant praying mantis, but with 6 arms instead of 4 limbs. Its exoskeleton was deep green with gold patterns that seemed to shift in the light. 2 large black eyes studied him without blinking. "Yes, I'm Marcus Chun. You must be Victor?" Marcus extended his hand, then remembered that handshakes might not be universal. He lowered it awkwardly. "I am Victor of the Krill Collective. I will be your roommate during your assignment." The alien's translator device made his voice sound mechanical. "I have prepared the habitat pod according to human specifications. Temperature 21 degrees, humidity 40%, oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere." Marcus grabbed his bags and followed Victor through the curved corridors of Confluence Station. Other aliens passed them in the halls. A being made of what looked like living crystal floated by, its body refracting light into rainbow patterns. 2 creatures in pressurized suits walked together, their methane atmosphere visible through the clear helmets. "The Luminae," Victor said, gesturing to the crystal being. "They require precise light frequencies to survive. And those are Shadi. They breathe methane, which is poison to most of us." Confluence Station maintained separate environmental zones for each species. Their quarters were smaller than Marcus expected. 2 sleeping alcoves faced each other across a common room. Equipment and control panels covered every wall. Victor's side was warm and humid, almost like a greenhouse. Marcus's side felt comfortable, but he noticed the environmental controls were more complex than necessary. "Why so many climate settings?" Marcus asked, examining the panel. "Humans are pretty flexible. I don't need it this precise." Victor's mandibles clicked in what might have been surprise. "Flexible? All species require strict environmental control. The krill die if temperature shifts more than 3 degrees. How can you be flexible?" Marcus shrugged. "We evolved on Earth. The temperature there changes all the time. Winter, summer, day, night. Our bodies adapt." "Adapt?" Victor sounded doubtful. "This seems primitive. Advanced species control their environment. They do not change their bodies to match it." The word primitive stung a little, but Marcus let it go. He was here to learn and share knowledge, not argue. Over the next few weeks, he noticed the same attitude from other species on the station. The Luminae seemed amused by human technology. The Shadi asked condescending questions about Earth's unstable climate. Even the station's eyes spoke to him slowly, as if he might not understand. But Marcus focused on his work. He was assigned to the Environmental Systems Division, maintaining the complex network that kept each species alive in their own zones. It was fascinating work, like solving a 3-dimensional puzzle where every piece affected every other piece. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Marcus returned to his quarters exhausted. He had spent 16 hours repairing a coolant leak in the Shadi section. His muscles ached and his eyes felt heavy. Victor was already in his alcove, perfectly still in a way that meant he was sleeping. The krill didn't move at all when they slept, which Marcus found unsettling. Marcus stumbled to his own alcove and fell onto the sleeping platform. The room felt warm, uncomfortably warm. He checked the environmental controls and groaned. The cooling system was malfunctioning again. It wasn't dangerous, just annoying. The temperature was 26 degrees instead of 21. He was too tired to fix it tonight. Marcus simply pulled off his thermal blanket and tossed it aside. The cooler air felt good against his skin. Within minutes, he was asleep. He didn't notice the environmental sensors recording this unusual behavior. He didn't see Victor wake up and stare at him in horror. To sleep without thermal regulation, without protection, seemed insane to the Krill, like standing at the edge of a cliff or swimming with predators. But Marcus slept peacefully, his body automatically adjusting to the slightly warmer temperature. His billions of years of evolution on a changing planet made this trivial. He dreamed of Earth, of camping trips where he'd slept under the stars with just a thin sleeping bag, of hot summer nights with only a fan for comfort. The neutron star spun outside the window, its light painting streaks across the walls of their quarters. The station hummed with the sound of 1,000 life support systems working perfectly. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. At 3 in the morning station time, Marcus's comm device beeped. He ignored it in his sleep. It beeped again, more insistently. Then the lights flashed red. Marcus jerked awake. Emergency lighting bathed the room in crimson. The station's alarm was screaming, a sound he'd only heard during drills. Warning! The Eye's voice echoed through every speaker. Catastrophic power failure in main reactor. Emergency protocols engaged. All personnel report to evacuation stations. Marcus rolled out of his alcove and grabbed his uniform. His heart pounded. Catastrophic power failure? That meant the fusion reactor that powered everything on Confluence was dying. Victor was already moving toward the emergency hibernation pod in the corner. The temperature will drop rapidly without power, he said, his voice high with stress. My species cannot survive the cold. I must enter stasis. Marcus ran to the environmental panel. The readings made his blood run cold for a different reason. Main power was at 15% and falling. Backup systems were failing one by one. The station was bleeding heat into space, and there was nothing to stop it. How long until life support fails? Marcus asked the AI. 47 minutes until environmental collapse. All personnel must evacuate to cryogenic pods. Marcus's mind raced. 47 minutes. But someone had to fix the reactor, or everyone in those pods would freeze to death eventually anyway. He pulled up the engineering schematics, and his stomach sank. The reactor core was at the center of the station. And every lift, every automated transport system was failing. Someone would have to go there manually, through corridors that were already getting cold. He looked at Victor climbing into his hibernation pod. He thought about the Luminae who would crystallize and shatter in the cold, the Shathi who would freeze solid in their methane suits, and Marcus realized something terrible. He was the only one who could move when the temperature dropped. He was the only one primitive enough, flexible enough, to survive what was coming. He had gone to sleep uncovered and comfortable. Now he was waking up to a responsibility he never expected. The temperature in Marcus's quarters had already dropped to 15 degrees. He could see his breath forming small clouds in the red emergency lighting. Victor's hibernation pod was sealed, the krill frozen in protective stasis inside. Marcus pulled on his uniform with shaking hands, not from cold yet, but from fear. AI, give me a status report, Marcus said, his voice steady despite everything. Main reactor containment failing. Fusion reaction unstable. Power at 12%. Temperature dropping 2 degrees per minute. Gravity generators failing. Magnetic lifts offline. Life support compromised in sections A through G. Marcus pulled up the station schematic on his wall display. Confluence was shaped like a wheel with spokes. The reactor sat at the hub, and the habitat sections formed the outer ring. Under normal conditions, magnetic lifts move people through the spokes to the center. But those lifts needed power. Can anyone else reach the reactor core? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Negative. All krill personnel have entered emergency hibernation. Lumine are crystallizing due to temperature drop. Shadi cannot leave their methane zones without extensive preparation time. You are the only mobile personnel. Marcus grabbed the emergency thermal suit from his locker. It was designed for brief exposure to space, maybe 15 minutes of protection. The journey to the reactor core would take at least an hour, probably 2. And then he'd need to make repairs. The suit wouldn't be enough. But it was all he had. He sealed the suit and checked the helmet. The heads-up display showed external temperature, 9 degrees and falling. Marcus stepped into the corridor and immediately understood how bad things were. The station was dying around him. Emergency lights flickered. Frost was forming on the metal walls. In the distance, he could hear the groan of metal contracting in the cold. The normal hum of life support systems was gone, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by alarms. Marcus started walking toward the nearest spoke that led to the station center. His thermal suit kept him warm for now, but he could feel the cold trying to seep in through the seals. He passed the Lumine section. Through the transparent walls, he could see their crystalline bodies growing dim and cloudy. They looked like ice sculptures now, beautiful and still. His chest tightened with guilt and fear. If he failed, they would shatter into pieces when the temperature dropped further. The Shadi section was sealed completely. Their methane environment had its own independent systems, but those would fail too without main power. They had maybe 6 hours before their backup generators died. Marcus reached the spoke entrance. Normally, a magnetic lift would carry him smoothly to the center in 3 minutes. Now, the lift shaft was just a dark tunnel disappearing into the station's core. Emergency rungs lined the walls for maintenance work. He would have to climb. Marcus grabbed the first rung and started down. The metal was already painfully cold, even through his gloves. The shaft stretched below him for what looked like forever. His suit display showed external temperature, -2 degrees. He climbed steadily, rung after rung. His muscles started to burn from the effort. In zero gravity, this would be easier, but the gravity generators still had backup power for now. Marcus was grateful for that at least. Climbing in zero gravity through a spinning station would have been much worse. After 20 minutes, his hands were aching. The cold was seeping through his gloves faster than he expected. The suit's heating elements were struggling to keep up. Marcus paused to rest, hooking his arm through a rung and flexing his fingers to restore circulation. The temperature display now showed -12 degrees. He kept climbing, down and down into the heart of the station. His breath came harder now, fogging his helmet. The suit's scrubbers were working to clear the condensation, but ice was forming on the inside of his visor. Marcus thought about his training on Earth. He'd grown up in Seattle, where winter meant rain and occasional snow. He'd gone camping in the mountains, slept in tents when it was below freezing outside. His body knew cold. It knew how to shiver, how to pull blood from his extremities to protect his core, how to keep functioning. But this was different. This was space cold, the kind of cold that killed in minutes. Finally, after 40 minutes of climbing, Marcus reached the bottom of the shaft. He pulled himself into the central hub corridor and nearly fell. His legs were shaking from exertion and cold. The corridor stretched in both directions, a ring that circled the reactor core. Aye, which way to reactor access? Marcus asked through chattering teeth. Proceed clockwise 47 meters. Manual access, hatch on your right. Marcus started walking. Each step felt heavy. The thermal suit's power display was blinking red now. The heating elements were failing. External temperature, -23 degrees. He tried not to think about what that meant. At -23, exposed skin would freeze in minutes. Even with the suit, hypothermia was becoming a real danger. The corridor was completely dark, except for his helmet light. The beam cut through the blackness, reflecting off frost-covered walls. Marcus's breath came in ragged gasps. He was working too hard, burning too much oxygen. He forced himself to slow down, to breathe steadily. The reactor access hatch appeared in his light beam. It was a heavy circular door with a manual wheel lock. Marcus grabbed the wheel and pulled. Nothing happened. The wheel was frozen solid. No, Marcus muttered. He braced his feet against the wall and pulled harder. The wheel budged slightly, then stopped. Ice had formed in the locking mechanism. Marcus looked around desperately. He needed heat to melt the ice. But where would he get heat in a station that was freezing to death? Then he had an idea. It was stupid and dangerous, but it might work. Marcus opened the emergency release valve on his suit's oxygen tank. A jet of compressed oxygen hissed out, and he directed it at the wheel lock. The rapidly expanding gas made a white cloud, but the pressure change created brief friction heat. He worked the wheel while spraying oxygen. The ice cracked. The wheel turned. Marcus pulled the hatch open and looked inside. The reactor chamber was vast, a spherical room dominated by the massive fusion core. It should have been glowing blue-white with contained starfire. Instead, it was dark and silent. Dead dot control panels lined the walls, their screens flickering with error messages. Marcus stumbled to the nearest panel and pulled up the diagnostic display. His hands were so cold, he could barely feel the controls. The problem was clear. A cascade failure in the magnetic containment system. The fusion reaction had collapsed, and the automated restart protocols had failed. Someone needed to manually recalibrate the containment fields and restart the reaction. Someone who could work in minus 30-degree temperatures with failing equipment and frozen controls. Marcus looked at his suit display. Power at 5%. He had maybe 10 minutes of heat left. The repairs would take at least an hour. He thought about giving up, about climbing back to the habitat ring and getting into a cryopod with everyone else, about letting someone else deal with this mess. But there was no one else. Just him. Just a primitive human who could survive conditions that would kill every other species on this station. Marcus took a deep breath and started removing his thermal suit. If it was going to fail anyway, he might as well have full mobility for the repairs. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but he gritted his teeth and got to work. Marcus stood in front of the reactor controls, wearing only his standard uniform. The thermal suit lay in a heap on the floor, its power cells completely dead. The cold wrapped around him like a living thing, squeezing and probing for weakness. His body responded the way millions of years of evolution had taught it to respond. He started shivering. Violent, uncontrollable shaking that made his whole body tremble. It looked like weakness, but it was actually his body's first defense. His muscles were contracting rapidly, generating heat through friction. It was burning energy fast, but it was keeping him alive. The temperature display on the wall showed minus 35 degrees. Marcus's breath formed ice crystals that fell to the floor with tiny clicking sounds. His fingers were already going numb, but he forced them to work the controls. The reactor's magnetic containment system had 12 primary field generators arranged in a sphere around the fusion core. According to the diagnostics, 7 of them had failed simultaneously when the power spike hit. Marcus needed to manually restart each one in sequence, then carefully balance the magnetic fields before attempting to reignite the fusion reaction. He started with Generator 1. The access panel was frozen shut. Marcus slammed his fist against it 3 times before it popped open. Inside, a mess of cables and circuit boards greeted him. He pulled out the burned-out power coupling and reached for a replacement from the emergency repair kit on the wall. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped the coupling twice. Marcus stopped and breathed deeply, trying to control the shivering. It didn't work. His body wouldn't stop shaking because his body was trying to keep him alive. He picked up the coupling with both hands and carefully connected it. The generator's status light turned from red to amber. 1 down, 6 to go. Generator 2 was worse. The access panel had ice inside it, coating the circuits in a layer of frost. Marcus had to brush it away with his bare hands, the ice burning his skin like fire. His fingers left smears of blood on the white frost. The temperature was dropping faster now. -42 degrees. At this temperature, exposed skin froze in under a minute. Marcus's ears were burning with cold. His nose felt like it might snap off his face. But he kept working. Generator 3 required him to crawl into a maintenance shaft. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Marcus squeezed inside, his body scraping against metal walls that felt like frozen knives. The shaft was darker than the main chamber, and his helmet light had died with the thermal suit. He worked by feel, his numb fingers tracing cable connections, finding the damaged components by touch alone. It took 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours. When he finally emerged from the shaft, his uniform was torn and his hands were bleeding from dozens of small cuts. 4 generators fixed. 3 to go. Marcus tried to stand and his legs gave out. He fell hard to the floor, the impact jarring his teeth. His body temperature was dropping dangerously low now. The shivering had stopped, which was a bad sign. When the shivering stopped, it meant his core temperature was falling below critical levels. He lay on the frozen floor and thought about giving up. It would be easy. Just close his eyes and let the cold take him. It wouldn't hurt much. Hypothermia was supposed to be peaceful at the end, like falling asleep, but Marcus thought about Victor in his hibernation pod, about the Luminae freezing in their quarters, about the Shathi who would die when their backup power failed. 2,347 beings on this station, all of them depending on him. He thought about Earth, about humanity's long climb from the African savanna to the stars. How many of his ancestors had refused to give up when things got hard? How many had kept going when every logical part of their brain screamed at them to stop? Humans were persistence hunters. They chased prey not by being faster or stronger, but by refusing to quit, by running until the prey collapsed from exhaustion, by being too stupid or too stubborn to know when they were beaten. Marcus pushed himself up. His movements were slow and clumsy now. His fine motor control was gone, but he could still move. He could still work. Generator 5 was on the opposite side of the chamber. Each step felt like walking through deep water. His legs didn't want to obey him anymore. Marcus fell twice on the way across the room, but each time he got back up. The temperature was -51 degrees now. This was cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide out of the air. If there had been any moisture left in the chamber, it would have been solid ice on every surface. Marcus's body was shutting down non-essential functions. His hands and feet felt like blocks of wood attached to his arms and legs. His thinking was getting fuzzy, his thoughts moving through molasses. But the core of him, the part that made him human, kept burning. He fixed Generator 5 by smashing the control panel with a wrench until it reset. Not elegant, but it worked. The status light turned amber. Generator 6 required precise calibration. Marcus stared at the controls with unfocused eyes. The numbers and readouts blurred together. He couldn't remember the calibration sequence. His training, his knowledge, it was all locked away behind the fog of hypothermia. He stood there for what might have been 5 minutes or 50, trying to remember. Then his training kicked in through instinct rather than conscious thought. His hands moved across the controls, adjusting settings by muscle memory rather than understanding. The status light turned amber. 6 down, 1 to go. Generator 7 was behind a maintenance panel in the floor. Marcus knelt down and tried to open it. The panel was stuck. He pulled harder. Nothing happened. He looked at his hands. They were blue-gray, the color of a corpse. Dark patches on his fingers showed where frostbite had set in. He couldn't feel them at all anymore. Marcus grabbed the panel with both hands and pulled with everything he had left. The panel shrieked in protest, then tore free. He dropped it and looked into the opening. The last generator was down there, 3 meters below the floor level. There was a ladder, but Marcus knew he couldn't climb down and back up again. His body had nothing left on, so he jumped. He landed hard on the lower platform, his legs buckling. Something in his ankle twisted, and pain shot up his leg. But Marcus barely felt it. Pain was distant now, unimportant. The generator was right in front of him. The repair was simple, just replacing a blown fuse. Marcus's fingers refused to grip the fuse properly. He tried 3 times, dropped it twice. On the 4th try, he used both hands and managed to seat the fuse in its socket. The status light turned amber. All 7 generators were online. Now came the hard part. Marcus had to climb back up to the main floor and access the primary control panel to restart the fusion reaction. He looked at the ladder and knew he couldn't do it, but he had to. Marcus grabbed the ladder with hands that couldn't feel the rungs. He pulled himself up 1 step at a time. His body was moving on pure will now, past the point where physics said it should function. Each movement was a small victory against death. He was halfway up when his grip failed. Marcus fell back to the lower platform, landing on his injured ankle. This time, he did feel the pain, a bright spike that cut through the fog. He lay there, breathing hard. The fusion core loomed above him, dark and cold, waiting for him to fail so it could stay dead forever. Marcus got up again. He grabbed the ladder again. He climbed again. This time, he made it to the top. Marcus crawled across the floor of the reactor chamber toward the main control panel. He couldn't stand anymore. His legs simply refused to support his weight. So he crawled, pulling himself forward with his arms, leaving a trail of blood from his frostbitten hands on the frozen metal. The control panel rose above him like a mountain. Marcus used the edge of the console to pull himself upright. He swayed dangerously, his vision tunneling to a narrow point. The temperature display showed -68 degrees. At this temperature, exposed flesh froze solid in seconds, but Marcus was still alive, still moving. His core body temperature had dropped to 32 degrees Celsius, far below normal, deep into severe hypothermia territory. By every medical standard, he should be unconscious or dead. Yet somehow his body kept going. The control panel swam in and out of focus. Marcus blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. The startup sequence for the fusion reactor required precise timing and careful input. One mistake and the magnetic containment would fail catastrophically. The resulting explosion would vaporize the entire station. No pressure. His fingers hovered over the controls. They were so numb that he couldn't tell if he was actually touching the buttons or not. He had to watch his hands to know what they were doing. Even then, his frostbitten fingers left smears of blood on the touchscreens. The first step was to balance the magnetic field generators. Marcus pulled up the field strength displays for all 7 generators he'd just repaired. They showed as amber, indicating they were online but not yet synchronized. He needed to adjust each one to create a perfectly balanced spherical field. Normally, this was done by the AI, making thousands of micro-adjustments per second. Marcus would have to do it by hand, with fingers that couldn't feel and eyes that couldn't focus properly. He started with Generator 1, increasing the field strength in tiny increments. The display showed the field shape warping and flexing. Too much, and it would collapse the other fields. Too little, and the balance would fail. Marcus worked slowly, adjusting each generator in turn. The cold made him clumsy. He had to redo several adjustments when his numb fingers hit the wrong controls. Time stretched out. Minutes felt like hours. The temperature continued to drop. -73 degrees. Finally, all 7 generators showed balanced. The magnetic field was stable, ready to contain the fusion reaction. Marcus moved to the next step of the sequence. He had to make a choice now. The reactor startup required a massive power surge to ignite the fusion reaction. That power could come from 2 sources. He could draw it from the emergency batteries that were currently running minimal life support throughout the station. Or he could draw it from the backup generators that were keeping everyone's hibernation pods and emergency systems running. If he used the emergency batteries, life support would fail immediately. The temperature would drop even faster. But the hibernation pods would stay active, keeping everyone in stasis until help arrived. Assuming help arrived before the backup generators failed. If he used the backup generators, he risked everyone in the hibernation pods. If the reactor startup failed, they would all die instantly when their pods shut down. But if it succeeded, it could restore full power and heat to the entire station. Marcus stared at the controls with unfocused eyes. His thoughts moved slowly, struggling through the fog of hypothermia. He tried to calculate the odds, the risk factors, the logical choice, but he couldn't think clearly enough for logic anymore. All he had left was instinct, and he chose the backup generators. All or nothing. Save everyone or fail completely. No half measures. His hand moved across the controls, routing power from the backup systems to the reactor ignition sequence. Warning messages flashed on the screen. The IS voice echoed weakly through failing speakers. Warning! This action will terminate all non-essential systems. Hibernation pods will shut down in 30 seconds. Confirm action. Marcus pressed confirm. Across the station, hibernation pods began their shutdown sequence. Emergency lights dimmed to nothing. The last remaining heat in the life support system bled away into space. Confluence Station went completely dark and silent. In the reactor chamber, Marcus initiated the fusion startup sequence. The magnetic field generators hummed to life, their fields intersecting and reinforcing each other. The chamber filled with a blue glow as the fields began to compress the fusion. Fuel. Marcus watched the displays with growing desperation. The fuel compression ratio climbed slowly. 50%. 60%. It needed to reach 95% before ignition would be possible. 70%. 80%. One of the field generators began to fluctuate. The amber status light flickered. Marcus's repair wasn't holding. The generator was failing again. No, Marcus whispered through frozen lips. Not now. Please, not now. He stumbled to the failing generator and tore open the access panel. Ice had formed inside again, coating the circuits he'd just repaired. The new power coupling was cracking from thermal stress. In seconds it would fail completely. Marcus reached inside with his ruined hands and held the coupling in place. The cold metal felt like nothing against his frozen skin. He braced his arms against the panel frame and pressed the coupling firmly into its socket. The generator stabilized. The status light stopped flickering, but Marcus was stuck. If he let go, the coupling would fail and the magnetic field would collapse. He had to hold it in place until the fusion reaction ignited, and the reactor could take over. He looked at the main display across the chamber. The compression ratio was at 92%. Almost there. Just a little longer, 94%. Marcus's arms were shaking. Not from shivering, his body had stopped that hours ago. From muscle failure, from exhaustion, from the simple physical strain of holding his arms in position. 95%. The ignition sequence activated automatically. Deep inside the magnetic bottle, hydrogen atoms were compressed beyond the point of resistance. They slammed together, fusing into helium and releasing energy. The reaction spread, one fusion triggering the next, building exponentially. The reactor core blazed to life. Blue-white light filled the chamber, bright as a captured star. Heat radiated outward in waves. The fusion reaction was stable, self-sustaining, growing stronger every second. Marcus let go of the coupling and fell backward. He landed on the floor and lay there, bathing in the warmth. The reactor roared above him, pumping heat and power back into the station's dying systems. He had done it. Against every odd, against physics and biology and common sense. He had restarted the reactor. Marcus tried to get up and couldn't. His body had nothing left. He'd pushed it past every limit, ignored every warning, forced it to work in conditions that should have killed him hours ago. Now it was shutting down whether he wanted it to or not. His vision was fading. The bright light of the reactor dimmed to gray, then to black. Marcus felt himself falling, not through space, but through consciousness, dropping into a dark place where pain and cold couldn't follow. His last thought was a hope that he'd saved everyone, that his sacrifice had been enough. Then he was gone, and small medical drones were emerging from their charging stations as power returned to the station. They scanned the reactor chamber, located the human vital signs at critical levels, and swarmed toward him with emergency medical equipment. Throughout Confluence Station, systems were coming back online. Lights flickered to life. Heat began flowing through the environmental systems. In their various quarters, the hibernation pods that had gone dark just moments ago powered back up, maintaining the lives inside. Victor's pod display showed his vital signs steady and strong. The luminae in their crystal chambers began to glow again as warmth returned. The Shouthy's backup generators shut down with relief. Their emergency power no longer needed. And in the reactor chamber, the medical drones worked frantically to save the life of the one being who had saved everyone else. The human who had proven that sometimes the most primitive solution was the most powerful one. The ability not to control the environment, but to survive it. Marcus woke up slowly, fighting his way through layers of fog and confusion. The first thing he noticed was warmth. Wonderful, beautiful warmth surrounding him like a blanket. The second thing was pain. His hands hurt. His feet hurt. His whole body ached with a deep bone-level soreness that made him groan. "He is waking," a familiar clicking voice said. "Look there." Marcus opened his eyes. He was in the medical bay, lying in a specialized human recovery pod. The room was full of beings. Victor stood closest, his large black eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that might have been concern. Behind him, a luminae floated, its crystalline body refracting the light into gentle rainbows. Two Shadi in their methane suits stood near the door. And there were others, representatives from species Marcus had never met, all watching him. What happened? Marcus's voice came out as a croak. His throat was raw and painful. "You saved us," Victor said simply. "You restarted the reactor. You restored power to the station. You have been unconscious for 3 days while the medical systems repaired the damage to your body." Marcus looked down at his hands. They were wrapped in regeneration bandages, the advanced medical technology that could heal almost any injury given enough time. He could see dark patches under the bandages where the frostbite had been worst. "How bad?" he asked. A medical drone floated over, its display showing his chart. Severe hypothermia. Core body temperature reached 32 degrees Celsius. Frostbite on fingers, toes, ears, and nose. Multiple lacerations. Sprained ankle. Muscle damage from extreme exertion in sub-zero temperatures. You were clinically dead when the medical drones reached you. Your heart had stopped. They had to restart it. Marcus absorbed this information slowly. He had died. He had actually died and been brought back. "I don't remember that part," he said. "Your species has remarkable resilience," the medical drone continued in its mechanical voice. A being from any other known species would have perished within 10 minutes of exposure to those conditions. You survived for 2 hours and 17 minutes while performing complex repairs. This should not have been physiologically possible. The Lumine drifted forward, its voice like wind chimes. We have reviewed the station's recordings of your journey. With your permission, we would like to study the data. Your survival represents something unprecedented in galactic biology. Marcus started to shrug, then stopped when pain shot through his shoulders. Sure, I guess. Though I don't think I did anything special. I just kept going. Just kept going, Victor repeated. His mandibles clicked in. What Marcus had learned was amazement. You traversed environments that would have frozen our bodies solid. You worked with precision equipment when your extremities had no sensation. You made critical decisions while your brain was shutting down from hypothermia. And you say this is not special? Humans evolved on Earth, Marcus said, settling back into the recovery pod. Earth is extreme environments. Hot deserts, frozen tundra, high mountains with thin air, deep jungles full of diseases. We had to be adaptable to survive. Our bodies learned to handle temperature changes, to keep working when conditions got bad. It's just what we do. Adaptable, one of the Shadi said through its translator. We use environmental control because we thought it was superior to biological adaptation. We were wrong. The door to the medical bay opened and more beings entered. Marcus recognized the station commander, a tall Lumine whose crystalline structure was more complex than the others. Behind the commander came what looked like the entire senior staff of Confluence Station. Marcus tried to sit up straighter and winced. Commander, I'm sorry about the damage to the station. The generator repairs I did were rough, and I know I broke protocols by... The commander raised a crystalline appendage, cutting him off. You misunderstand why we are here, Marcus-chan. The Lumine's voice resonated through the room. We are not here to reprimand you. We are here to honor you. Vector moved aside, and the commander approached Marcus's recovery pod. In its appendages, it held a small crystalline star that pulsed with inner light. This is the Star of Confluence, the commander said. It is the highest honor this station can bestow. It is given only to those who save lives at great personal risk. In the 300 years of this station's operation, it has been awarded 17 times. Never to a human, because there have never been humans here before you. But now, Marcus-chan, you are the 18th recipient. The commander placed the star on Marcus's chest, and it adhered to the medical gown with some kind of magnetic or molecular bond. Marcus stared at it, speechless. You saved 2,347 lives, the commander continued. Every being on this station owes you their existence. We have sent commendations to Earth's diplomatic corps and to the Galactic Council. Your species' application for full council membership, which was under review, has been approved unanimously. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. He'd expected consequences, reprimands, maybe even deportation for the damage his crude repairs had caused. He'd expected anything except this. Victor stepped forward again. I must apologize to you, Marcus. When you first arrived, I called your species primitive. I thought environmental control was a mark of advancement. I did not understand that there are different kinds of strength. Your body's ability to adapt, to survive, to continue functioning in conditions that would kill others. This is not primitive. It is extraordinary. We measure advancement by how well we can control our environment, the Lumine commander said. We build stations with perfect climate control. We create zones tailored exactly to our needs. We forgot that there is another path. The path of not needing control. The path of being strong enough to survive without it. One of the senior staff members, a being Marcus didn't recognize, spoke up. The Galactic Council is drafting new safety protocols based on your actions. All deep space stations will now require at least one species capable of functioning in extreme environments. Earth has been formally requested to provide engineers and emergency personnel. There's more, Vector said, and Marcus could hear something like pride in his clicking voice. The footage of your journey has been shown to the Council. The other species are calling humans apex survivors. They are saying that evolution on Earth must have been remarkably challenging to produce beings like you. Marcus laughed, which hurt his chest. Yeah, Earth is pretty harsh. We have predators, diseases, natural disasters, extreme weather. It tried to kill us for millions of years. So we got good at not dying. More than good, the commander said. You have mastered survival in a way no other known species has achieved. When I watched the recordings of you working in minus 68-degree temperatures, I ran the calculations. Aluminae would shatter instantly at that temperature. A krill would freeze solid in 7 seconds. A shathy in their environmental suit could survive perhaps 90 seconds before their suit failed and they died. You worked for over 2 hours, Victor added. You climbed. You repaired equipment. You made complex decisions. Your species is not just resilient. You are persistent beyond reason. You do not know when to give up. Persistence hunters, Marcus said quietly, remembering his thoughts in the reactor chamber. That's what we were on Earth before we invented tools and civilization. We chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't quit. And you did not quit when logic said you should, the commander said. This quality, this unreasonable persistence, this is what saved all of us. Over the next few weeks, as Marcus recovered, life on Confluence Station changed. The other species treated him differently. Not with the subtle condescension he'd felt before, but with respect, even awe. Engineers came to ask his advice on emergency systems. Scientists wanted to study human physiology. Young beings from various species visited the medical bay to meet the human who had saved the station. Victor became more than a roommate. He became a friend, someone who had seen Marcus at his worst and his best and appreciated both. They had long conversations about Earth and the krill homeworld, about different paths to survival and success. One evening, after Marcus was cleared to return to his quarters, he and Victor sat together in their common room. The environmental controls were working perfectly now, maintaining exactly the right temperature and humidity for each of them. Marcus reached over and turned his climate control down by 5 degrees. The change was subtle, barely noticeable, but Victor's mandibles clicked in alarm. What are you doing? The krill asked. Testing something, Marcus said. He pulled his blanket off and set it aside, wearing just a light shirt and pants. When I first got here, I fell asleep without my blanket because the room was too warm. You looked horrified. I was horrified, Victor admitted. To sleep without thermal protection seemed insane to me, like standing in vacuum without a suit. But now? Marcus asked. Victor was quiet for a moment. Now, I understand. It is not recklessness. It is confidence. Your body does not need the protection because it can protect itself. You are not vulnerable. You are adapted. Marcus smiled. Exactly. And that adaptation, that ability to handle change, it's not a weakness or a sign that we're primitive. It's a different kind of strength. The strongest kind, Victor said, because it cannot be taken from you. I depend on environmental controls,